Dr. Joy Jacobs is an internationally recognized expert in the treatment of food addiction and eating disorders. Dr. Joy is a Harvard-educated clinical psychologist working in private practice virtually, a clinical professor at UCSD School of Medicine, and published author who provides individual and group coaching for individuals with eating disorders and food addiction. She has been featured on The Doctors, The Today Show, Time, Elle, and more. Dr. Joy provides cutting-edge strategies for recovery and healing. To learn more about her work, please visit www.drjoyjacobs.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hopenning, the place where hope is happening when you open your mind and heart to it. I am so happy to have Dr. Joy Jacobs with us today. It is just a privilege. Dr. Joy, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, what a privilege it is. I have been following you for many years, and I know you've had a similar type of struggle with food. You are an expert in food addiction and eating disorders, and you've made the last 2 decades your life purpose. There's so much value in that because of what you went through as well. So, can you give our viewers a little bit of your background and how you ended up being such world-renowned psychologist in the field of eating disorders and food addiction?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Fran. And I'll try to boil my story down to something that doesn't take our whole time together because it could be long and drawn out like most of our stories, right? Because there are so many twists and turns that happen. I have found in the eating disorder and food addiction journey. And, as a small child, I loved to eat, I loved food, and I didn't have the kind of body that was maybe the ideal body type. And I wanted to be a ballet dancer. And I went on my first diet when I was 10 years old, trying to get that ballet dancer's body. And it turned very rapidly into anorexia nervosa. And that went on for about a year. And then I decided I was quitting ballet because I could never be healthy and be able to eat if I was doing that. I switched sports and I was fine for a few years. And then my parents went through a divorce when I was a senior in high school. And I decided to go on a diet again. I was feeling like I was eating too much. And that again turned into another round of anorexia. And then I struggled with varieties of anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder from the ages of 17 to 24. And I tried various treatment approaches, most of which were not effective. My bulimia at some point became life-threatening. And then finally, after I graduated from Harvard Law School, which I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, it turns out I didn't. But I got very, very sick with my eating disorder there. And when I graduated, I went to New York City and was ready to check into inpatient treatment. I was really in a life-threatening condition in terms of my eating disorder. And every treatment center that was recommended was full. And somehow I got, the universe put together an amazing treatment team of a psychologist, a nutritionist, and a medical doctor. And I left the law and I entered into recovery, and I spent, a few years in New York City, just focusing primarily on my recovery and doing work which supported my recovery, and then felt just so drawn. It was like I did not want to go back to school. Let's be clear. I did not want to retrain in another profession. There were many things that I could do with my law degree and my writing skills. I worked at Vogue magazine, which was a dream job for me. But I felt this pull, and I can't describe it as anything other than a calling to help people through this journey. I had struggled so much. I searched for, almost 10 years for effective therapy and could not find it. And I just really felt like this purpose of helping people recover from eating disorders was my life calling. So I went back to school. I got a PhD in clinical psychology. I focused on eating disorders and obesity treatment, worked in research, worked clinically, and then have devoted, the past 25 years to that mission of helping people walk through the journey of recovery.
Which is incredible in itself. 25 years. That's a big chunk of time to devote your life. And I'm sure that you've seen changes in demographics and changes in maybe even the treatment of that since you first started 25 years ago. That's what,
2000,
right,
2000 is
2000.
when I started.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So my question is, how did you know? Like, what happened to your body when it became so life-threatening that you were checking yourself into basically a rehab program, right?
Well, I wanted to. I couldn't because I couldn't find
Right.
a spot. But I mean, I was very weak. I was very ill. My doctors told me I was going to die. I was a daily Ipecac user. Ipecac is no longer legally sold. It is a poison. It's usually in a poison control kit. It is something that induces vomiting and is very deadly and life-threatening. And I had been using it daily for years as a purging technique because I could not throw up on my own and it was going to kill me. So my doctors were very clear and I couldn't stop on my own. And
Yeah.
so it was not a fuzzy line.
Yeah. I never did have anorexia, but bulimia, yeah. And the thing was, I didn't even know about bulimia until I had heard about it from somebody else, that
Mhm.
that was a way that they controlled their weight and they could eat whatever they wanted and then purge.
By the way, is not even true. It may be like that I just want it for anyone listening
Sure.
who could get ideas. I think it's really important to keep this conversation safe.
Mhm.
And that is effective for a very short period of time. And then the body adapts and quickly starts absorbing calories the moment they hit the mouth and refusing to bring up food. The vomiting becomes less effective. So that's a short-term effect, but people get trapped in it. And more times than not, especially with adolescent clients, I'll ask them like, how did this start? And oftentimes it was like either from a friend or something they saw on TV.
Right. And with the, proclivity of stuff available out there on the internet, it's no wonder that people need someone like you to help them in that journey, someone who's well educated in that field and knows what's going on. What do you see as the demographics right now? Do you see that there's more young women or more young men or in the field? Because there's two different things going on here. There's eating disorders and then there's addiction. So maybe if it would be helpful if you helped us to understand the difference between the two.
Okay. So eating disorders are diagnosed conditions that are included in the psychiatric Bible in the United States, which is called
Mhm.
the DSM. And those have specific criteria of what anorexia is, what bulimia is, and what binge eating disorder. And there's also a diagnosis called ARFID, which used to be eating disorder not otherwise specified and is more of like a category that includes a mix of different kinds of symptoms that are often life-threatening and definitely quality of life threatening. So those are specific conditions that have specific criteria in terms of food restriction, binge episodes, purge episodes, and so on. Food addiction is not yet a recognized diagnosis. So no one really can define what it is because it's not in that Bible. And many of us on the professional level have been working very hard to have it included as a diagnosis, just like substance addiction is included as a diagnosis. So that is not yet the case. What addictive eating looks like is oftentimes people will describe the experience of being unable to stop eating once they start and being specifically triggered by highly processed foods, often foods that are mainly composed of flour and or sugar. And once those substances are ingested, like any other substance of addiction, a cycle of craving ensues, and people feel uncontrollable cravings and are unable to regulate their food intake. And there can often be a fuzzy line between binge eating disorder and food addiction. Many binge eaters also have food addiction. Many food addicts also have binge eating disorder. And this is why it takes a very skilled diagnostician, not someone who comes into meetings with clients with already a preconceived notion of what they are going to see, to really parse out all of this, because it's not always evident immediately. And those diagnoses are really important to tease out because it will dictate the course of treatment.
And what I like about your treatment is it's very specific to the individual, right? So perhaps I'm purging to
Mhm.
control my weight, but I also love running and working out and lifting weights and all of the rest of that. So would you take that into consideration when you're putting a plan together for me?
Absolutely. I mean, we must look at the whole person. And, for some people, that exercise is a form of purging as well, and is compulsive and obligatory and needs to be addressed and regulated along with eating and other purging behaviors. For the next person, that's the exercise, the physical activity is regulated and really important for their mental health. And I believe long term in recovery, even people who are maybe exercise addicts or using exercise as a purging method initially can return to physical activity with boundaries and with professional support and a strategy for doing so. But for the person who is the addicted exerciser, compulsive about exercise, working out with injuries and using exercise to purge, that exercise often may not be an option initially in recovery and comes in later.
I know that you're going to do a full marathon, and we're going to talk about that in a bit.
Sure.
But I love half marathons, and by and large, I see all kinds of body shapes. There's lots of women that are doing half marathons of all kinds of body shapes. So when I ask about the demographics, and this might be a loaded question because I know that you have also worked with youngsters, teenage boys that have food restriction, or they've used methods of staying lean so that they can be super ripped or whatever. So, in general, what do you see now in groups that you have?
Well, thank you for returning to that question. You had asked about what's the difference between eating disorders and food addiction, and we didn't get to that demographic question that you had also posed earlier. And, it used to be the case that eating disorders affected young white women. That was like back in the 80s and 90s. That is not the case. Eating disorders and food addiction occur across all races, across genders, across age categories. Among my first private practice patients were three teenage boys who were varsity athletes with full-blown anorexia nervosa, and that was very rare at that time. That is no longer rare because we live in a toxic food environment. We live in a world saturated with social media. We live in a world with intense pressure to look and be a certain way, and many people with a variety of body types that don't fit whatever the stereotypic image of the time is, and that changes year to year as well. And I also know for sure that, up until recent years, middle-aged and older individuals were considered like not part of the ED or food addiction population. And now those people who developed eating disorders when I did or before, who never found the right treatment, are now either, in middle age, late middle age, or considered to be senior citizens. And I work with a large number of those people. So, eating disorders and food addiction are no longer for young white women. They occur across a whole range of ages and body types. You cannot tell by looking at someone whether they do or do not have an eating disorder or whether they do or do not have food addiction. And I think this is very important for everyone who's listening now to understand. Just because someone looks unusually thin doesn't mean that they have an eating disorder. And just because you think someone looks larger than you think they should doesn't mean they have an eating disorder or food addiction. We come in a variety of shapes and sizes genetically.
Yeah. And is it still the secret, right? Because when I was in my early, I guess I would have been in my late teens and early 20s, when I was binging and purging, nobody knew, like nobody. I did not tell anybody for decades, like maybe within the last 5 years has even my family known.
I mean, that's a matter of individual choice, but I would say that is pretty common. I don't think most people are very open about their eating disorders, disordered eating, or food addiction unless they're in a recovery setting. I mean, there are individuals who have gone out on social media and really brought the attention to light, some of whom still suffer and struggle. But I would say that's the exception rather than the rule because guilt and shame and stigma are still very much associated with these conditions.
Mhm. The shame part of it. So that brings us really well into the trauma. So is there always trauma, capital T trauma, related to a food disorder, addiction?
That's a great question. So it used to be thought one of the hypotheses around like what are the factors that create eating disorders was that there had to be some childhood trauma. That is not the case. That is unequivocally not the case. Some people had perfectly amazing childhoods and families of origin and yet still develop eating disorders. Eating disorders have a very large genetic component in studies that have been conducted, there is a lot of crossover between eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, and anxiety disorders. And so often, in one person, what might come out as a generalized anxiety disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder, in another person will develop into an eating disorder. And maybe back before the onset of the media age that we've been living in for decades now, it would have been an anxiety disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder, but because of the social and environmental and cultural pressures that people see and feel and the marketing that's done to cater to those fears and anxieties, it develops into an eating disorder. Now, there are many people who have trauma histories who also have eating disorders and food addiction, and that certainly can contribute to the onset of those conditions, but it is not a prerequisite by any circumstance. But what I will say, and I say this often to my clients because I think it's very important to process with them, having an eating disorder or having had an eating disorder or food addiction is traumatic in and of itself. And there can be trauma related to having the condition itself that does need to be addressed in the course of treatment. But the good news that I want everyone here who's struggling to understand is that you do not need to heal all your trauma to heal your eating, right? Because some people get trapped into decades of decades trying to heal every trauma and uncover every trauma and figure out like what is the missing link that I need to find so that my eating can get better. And that is just not how things should be going. You can regulate your eating and get professional help and be really in recovery from an eating disorder and food addiction without having completely healed all those traumas. Now, it's important to do that trauma work, not only for sustaining recovery, but also for your quality of life and overall mental health. But I just don't want anyone here in the audience who has experienced trauma with a big T to think that that has to be 100% healed before their eating challenges can be fixed.
Mhm. I wanted to talk about long-term recovery.
Mhm.
long-term sustainable recovery because um, I came out of the bright line eating community and the founder, Susan Pierce Thompson, talked a lot about the crystal vase.
Mhm.
And the crystal vase that once you're, I guess you can say clean and sober,
Mhm.
and you're following, we called it the bright lines, weighed and measured food, and 3 meals a day, and write your food plan down. And there's a
No
fourth one.
flour and no sugar. Those
Oh,
are the
yes, of course, the most important one, right? Once you've got that under control, or, you've got that plan, you stick to it, it's the crystal vase. And don't break your crystal vase. And yet it's so hard. For myself, I was really super clean. I call it clean for a couple of years. And then I started some traveling after the pandemic. You could finally travel again. And it just was impossible because I couldn't get the food that would fit the plan. It just wouldn't. And so at that point, technically I wasn't a crystal vaser anymore. But I think there's a shift now, like away from that. Can you talk about long-term sustainability in recovery?
right. And this is where we get into the idea. I very strongly believe in the importance of progress over perfection. And as long as we are moving in the right direction, that's what we need to be doing. I think a lot of people who have perfectionistic personalities. Well, the research, it's not just what I think. The research shows again and again that those who develop eating disorders tend to struggle with perfectionism as well. It is very common among that population. And so things like bright lines and perfect abstinence can be something that seems very appealing initially to that type of personality because it really fits into the whole scope of how they've been doing things most of their lives, but can have a dark side because if there's a slip, if there's a mess up, if something happens and they're not perfect, that can be a reason to just throw in the towel and give up. And so it's a very dangerous dance. And what I like to remind my clients is, okay, let's say you're aiming for, meeting these four bright lines or perfectly complying with whatever your definition of recovery is. If there's a slip, just like if you had one flat tire, you wouldn't go ahead and slash the other three tires of your car because you had one flat tire. The same thing applies to recovery. I really encourage my people, do not throw in the towel of something. If you eat too much more than you planned, if you eat flour or sugar and you weren't supposed to, we move on. We use it as a learning experience. I really talk about the upward spiral of recovery. If we have slips, we can spiral upward by learning from them. And so, especially when we're talking about food, when we're talking about disordered eating and food addiction, it's way more difficult to be a crystal vaser with this kind of abstinence versus substances, drugs, or alcohol, because you can choose not to drink alcohol completely. You can choose not to take any medications or, you know, substances of abuse completely, but we have to eat each and every day. We're faced with food each and every day, multiple times. And so it's probably the most challenging form of recovery because of that. We can't abstain from eating altogether, which some of my clients come in wanting to do, which I remember feeling that way too. As like a former anorexic who then had bulimia and binge eating disorder. And, that's triggered by starvation brain, which is a totally different concept. But, at the time, I just thought I had a weak will. And wouldn't it be great if I just didn't have to eat at all? And so binge eaters come in looking like binge eaters, but often have underneath it a very large restrictor part that is running the show.
That brings us really well into the topic of these really restrictive diets. I know I have a few people in my life, not a few, two that I can say that are on the carnivore diet. Like, I don't know if you consider that a restrictive diet. Would you consider the carnivore diet?
It
restrictive?
certainly is a very specialized way of eating. It's not something I recommend for eating disorder recovery. Many people in the food addiction community really believe strongly in it because they feel that maybe grains and other foods are triggering and meat is not. I personally don't find it helpful for long-term recovery or physical health, and that's a controversial topic. And there are differences of opinion, but it's not something I support and would be able to support clients in pursuing as part of their recovery.
Mhm. So in recovery, when you have your clients, I know that you really believe in group therapy, right? So why is it so effective? Like even when I talk about it, I get goosebumps. So I know that's truth,
Right.
right? It's
Yes.
truth.
It falls under the umbrella of coaching versus therapy, and that's for a variety of reasons that we don't need to get into now. But group work is incredibly powerful because when we're a member of a group, number one, we automatically have a community of people that are sharing similar struggles to our own, and we can be in what I call the conversation of recovery. And I do believe that recovery occurs in conversation. We cannot solve a problem on the same level that it was created, right? And eating disorders and addiction thrive in isolation, and the way to heal is in community. And not only that, when one person is being coached, everyone is being coached. And this is what we call borrowing the benefits. So when we hear advice on one person's experience, we're able to apply it to our own. And sometimes we can hear it better when someone else is in the hot seat, so to speak, and we don't have our defenses up, we're not in fight or flight mode, we're able to really integrate and absorb that. And then the social support is incredibly important because you have running buddies in recovery all of a sudden, people that you can pick up to the phone or text or message or get on Zooms with when you're struggling, people you can celebrate with when things are going well, people who understand what you're doing and why, and all the kind of roller coaster experiences that happen in the recovery journey. Recovery is not linear. There are ups and there are downs. And so being in community is incredibly vital to that whole process.
Mhm. So you've got a group that starts, I think it's November, and it runs till April,
Right. And our
right?
next group starts in May. And what's interesting, I think, what's really unique about what I offer is that most eating disorder recovery only focuses maybe on the food or focuses on the cognitive aspect of recovery. My work involves, I felt very disappointed by the tools of Western psychology in helping people heal eating disorders. And I really went on a mission about 10 to 15 years ago to learn more tools, not only for myself, but to give my clients. And so in my groups and with the individuals that I work with as well, we work on three levels. We work on the cognitive level, which most people are used to, talking and sharing about what's going on. But we also work on the subconscious level and the energetic level. And those are the factors that are often driving these disordered and addictive behaviors that are never addressed in typical approaches. Now, you may find that if you go to a retreat somewhere in India or if you go to an alternative health center, but then they won't be able to help you with the cognitive aspect, which is equally important. And so we work and we flow between all these three levels in the work that I do with my clients, so that I hope that it is my goal for anyone who is willing that they find complete recovery from food addiction and complete recovery from their eating disorder by integrating all these various techniques and these three levels of treatment.
And it is so important because we can go to a retreat in France or India or wherever, and or a rehab, like we can go into rehab, but we have to be able to live our lives in our house, in our town, in our city, wherever we are. We will come back here. And if we have the same friend groups, maybe, and the same outlook and the same people that tell you stuff, right? I mean, it's so powerful, the power of the peer group who we are hanging out with, that we have to be strong. We have to become strong where we are. And I think that's the brilliance of your group work because it is virtual, right? I could take it here in Northern Canada with minus 35 outside with you in LA, who's at, I don't know, probably like 60 or 70, right?
Exactly. And I mean, we have people from all over the world, from Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Israel, all over Canada, North America. So this is the gift of, I've actually been working virtually since 2016. So when the pandemic hit, I was already on Zoom and doing this, but it's been a great gift because it's true, you can be anywhere, and my group work is all recorded and kept on a portal too. So if someone, because of their time zone, cannot participate live, they can log in and watch the sessions. And I also believe in recovery and the importance of repetition. So even if you have attended something live, it's incredibly valuable to watch recordings, because if our programming and behaviors have been a certain way for many, many years, it takes a lot of work to create new pathways in the brain for new ways of behavior. And I think it's really important for anyone who's struggling to understand. You may say, like, I know I need to recover, or I know this issue is a real problem for me. And they're like waiting for the motivation to get started. And I'm a big believer, I've seen it in my own life and I've seen it with my clients, that motivation follows action. If you just get into the action of finding that person to work with who can help you, of opening that book, of logging onto some Facebook page that's recovery related, any action that you can take will start to spur the motivation. And then when we start seeing positive results, we get more and more motivated. But it's a big mistake and a very common error that people wait to get motivated to take action, and it actually works in the opposite direction. We need to take the action, and then the motivation will follow.
I agree. I used to say that a lot because I was in a 12-step program. This is my 25th year. I became a sponsor and it was in person. The door would open and somebody new would come in and they'd see me and I'd see them and I'm like, welcome.
They
Because
were so lucky to find you.
right? Because many times I knew these people, I knew them, and it was like they knew me, but they didn't know that I had the same problem as they do. And so it's like that shared, I'm here for you. And you coming through that door is that first step to say, I surrender. I can't do this. I've tried because usually when you get into a 12-step program or and your own kind of work, you tried everything else. You've done it all.
And I work with very intelligent and strong-willed people generally, and they often have an aversion to that word surrender. And so I think it's important to talk about it, that surrender is not giving up, it's giving over. It's releasing control over strategies and ways of being that are no longer working for you so that you can let the new in and write a new story.
And Joy, don't you think that those of us that were perfectionists, right?
Mhm.
And so, in some areas, maybe we still are. We've been a perfectionist throughout our whole life. We just had to look so, we just had to do it all right, hit the right boxes, everything. It's exhausting. It's
Mhm.
exhausting. And when we finally say, I can't do it anymore, um, it's giving permission, right? It's giving the permission to, I call God, the power, the universal power. Everybody's got a different definition of the higher power. It's giving permission to say, I can't do it. You do it. I'll be along on the journey. Just hold my hand. Just hold my hand on this journey.
It's so true, Fran. And what I have seen again and again and again, both in my own life and those of the people that I work with, is that when we have the willingness, when we decide that something isn't working for us anymore and we're willing to do things differently, The universe opens doors and windows that we don't even know are there. Things start to flow. People will come in, but what is so and so going to say? And how is this going to work out? And what's going to happen here? And when you are willing, literally the entire universe and all the forces of the universe will rally behind you and things flow. I just have seen it again and again.
I have to, and it's a miracle, like it, because you can't explain it, which
Sure.
is a really great way to talk about emotional regulation. There are things you do in your coaching programs and in your own life that keep you, I would say, maybe it's a groundedness. What do you do in your practice, but also for your the group work that you do with all these people that are there needing help?
Absolutely. I feel very strongly that nervous system regulation is an important and crucial foundation for recovery. Many people engage in addictive and disordered behavior in kind of like really futile attempts to regulate their nervous systems. And so, system regulation is a foundation of my own life and the work that I do with others. And so, that includes meditation, that includes emotional freedom technique, which is called tapping, kind of like colloquially, I can't even say the word. Really being mindful, journaling, all these kinds of practices support that nervous system regulation, which give us the power of the pause, that give us a groundedness so that we're not always just reacting to the world that around us and feeling like victims of circumstance. I really empower my clients to take charge of their lives, and I do strongly believe that the quality of our lives are determined by the quality of our thoughts, and we actually get to choose our thoughts and we choose them mindfully. And so I teach my people how to choose thoughts that actually work for them versus the dysfunctional thoughts that lead them in the downward spiral.
How do I know that when I'm choosing myself, that's not just being selfish? Like, I was raised in the Catholic tradition, right? So I was raised with the guilt that we inherited from Adam and Eve. Like, seriously, this is the way I was raised. So how do I know I'm not being selfish when I'm choosing to love myself and put myself first?
Right. And so, first of all, self-care cannot be outsourced. No one else can take care of our brains and our bodies but us. And we have nothing to give if we're not doing that. We cannot pour from an empty cup. So, one of the most selfless acts that you can really do is to love yourself because it supports everyone who interacts with you, from the clerk at the grocery store or the gas station to family members to people you work with to members of your religious community, and the list goes on. When we are better inside, we are better for everyone. So self-love and self-care is incredibly selfless because it is a benefit to everyone, and it really creates this positive domino effect. I mean, the people who don't take care of themselves are often the most miserable people to be around and the most toxic, to be honest, because they're full of anger and resentment and feeling deprived and feeling victimized because they don't feel like they have permission to take care of themselves, and they just become servants of everyone else. But they don't do it lovingly, they do it begrudgingly, and they do it out of a feeling that their only self source of love for self has to come from the outside. And only when that validation comes from the outside am I then worthy of thinking okay of myself, much less loving myself. And that's a total upside down way of doing things. The key is to love yourself first and then draw the people into your life who are healthy for you, versus doing things expecting people to love you for it, which doesn't work in the end anyway, and people don't respect us when that's our way of operating. And so healthy boundary setting, which is a whole course in and of itself, is a really important part of that.
What you said about people not respecting that, when you feel like you're obliged, when a
Mhm.
person feels like they're obliged to do fill in the blank, because it could be whatever. It could be with your children, with your job, with your community, the church community, whatever community you're part of. It becomes bitterness. It really does turn into bitterness. And I think that is all part of staying physically healthy as well. We talk about sugar and flour are part of the ultra processed food
Mhm.
push, right? It's cheaper to buy that now than it is to buy eggs for sure, but vegetables and all of that. So there is a time I know in my own eating where when I no longer consumed that type of food, it ended certain friendships
Mhm.
and it caused a rift in my own. I thought people that were super close to me no
Mhm.
longer wanted to be part of my people. And I was hurt, but it was something part of the process of my own recovery.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Sometimes does that happen in your people that you coach or in the people, like even in the young people's group, I'm not sure if you still do the anorexia,
Mhm.
bulimia
Well,
group, but
absolutely. When people move into recovery, relationships can shift, and those people that supported toxic behaviors or that feel threatened by your changes may move to the wayside. But I always feel like that's not just leaving empty space, that's creating space for people to come into your life who are aligned with your health and well-being and truly have your highest good in mind versus people who are benefiting from your being in a state of addiction or dysfunction of some sort, or requiring you to be in that state in order to be part of their lives, which might sound odd to someone who hasn't been in that situation, but it is very common. And so it's always an up leveling in recovery, and there can be a lot of discomfort and pain around the losses that happen, but I strongly believe, again, it's always an up leveling, bringing people into your life who are truly supportive and there for you unconditionally.
I think what we talked about before, that the universe opens up things, doors and windows that you never knew possible. I think once those people are no longer in your life, that doors and windows do open. They open in incredible ways that were never expected, but sure is wonderful to have in your life. You talked about tapping and you talked about meditation and you talked about journaling,
Mhm.
and that it creates that pause where, and in my own life, when I started to do that as part of the 12-step program I was in, because I spent decades teaching in an elementary school, where at one point I probably would have rolled my eyes at something. I actually had that pause where I could stop and I would ask for the right words, right? I would ask.
And isn't that a miracle? And you bring up a really important thing. A lot of people, when they come to work with me, they might think that they only want to work on the cognitive level, that they're not interested in meditation or any of these alternative techniques. And I always say, try it before you deny it. Try these things, see how they operate in your life, and then make a decision, right? It's this concept of no contempt prior to investigation. Try it before you deny it, because again, if you just keep doing the same old things that you've been doing, you're going to get the same results. If you want different results, you need to do different things, but you need to do them consistently. It's not a one and done, or, the change hasn't happened in a day, a week, and a month, so I'm going to throw in the towel and try something else. Consistency is key, and patience. If I leave anyone with a message today, it would be number one, the importance and power of patience and consistency, the daily show up, and that recovery is possible and available to anyone who is willing.
Yes. And you and I are living proof of it, right? So that brings me to a friend of mine is actually taking your group course right now. And her name is Deb Thomas, and she wanted me to mention her name.
Love
Deb
that.
did. And she's also from, well, you're not in San Diego anymore, you're in LA, but she's in San Diego. And, and she's a skeptic. Deb is, and she's been we've been close for about 7 years. She was always the one that I don't know if that's for me, you
Right,
know, that
right.
kind of thing. I don't know, I'll stay away. But she told me when I told her that I would be interviewing you, she said there's something different. And she's a skeptic, right? And she's done lots, different things. She says there's something different, and she says it's so inclusive. Your group is so inclusive, and she feels like she's seen and heard. It's different than she's ever experienced before. So I wanted you to know that because I think it's important for us people who put our hearts into something to know
Absolutely.
that you're making a difference.
Well, I'm so thrilled to hear that. And really, my mission in creating what I have created is to create something that doesn't exist and to create a framework for recovery that I was searching for desperately for almost a decade and almost died because I couldn't find it to create that experience and take the guesswork out of it and to make it a joyful process. I call it joyful recovery because when we think about recovery, yes, there's a lot of hard work involved, but we can do it joyfully. And it's really my goal to bring that joy into the recovery process. And I live and breathe it myself. And I want the people that I work with to feel it because we're not going to stick with something that doesn't bring us joy ultimately. And this process can be, again, this upward spiral of rebirth. And how often do we get to be reborn, right? And the recovery process literally allows us to build entirely new, beautiful, healthy lives full of connection and vitality.
Which is perfect for what? Let's talk about the full marathon you're running. Oh my goodness. And that's soon, Joy.
Yes,
Like by the,
yes. But maybe by the time this little
yes.
episode, it might be over by then. It's on March 16th. And, I had run half marathons, in my 20s and as a young mom. And then I hadn't run in more than a decade. And I had a ruptured appendix and some big health setbacks and a surgery. And I didn't know if I'd ever run again. And when I was able to, just one thing spiraled into another and people would see me and be like, you should run a marathon. And I was always thinking like, no, that's not for me. I'm not interested in that. But then I just decided that I really wanted to have this challenge. And when I do something, I never do it for myself alone. I'm trying to raise $25,000 for Beyond Type 1, which is a nonprofit that supports people with type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition, so it is not related to lifestyle. It cannot be cured by lifestyle. And one of my beautiful sons was diagnosed with that at the age of 10. And so I have devoted this journey to raising money for a nonprofit. We hope to find a cure. And for me, I've been documenting every day of this marathon journey because it's not about the marathon. All of these things that we go for, it's really not about the end result. It's about who we become along the way. How do we show up every day when maybe we don't want to, or an obstacle gets thrown in our path, or we're telling ourselves that we can't do something. I'm trying to model here and document for anyone who's interested how we overcome obstacles and how we can achieve almost anything one day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time. That's what it's about for me. And this past weekend, I shared something on my social media. I've been following a plan. So this is the most important thing for people in recovery too. You need to have a plan, you need to trust the plan, and then you need to follow the plan. And so that applies to this marathon journey as well. And on the plan was a 22-mile training run.
Uh-huh.
And I did complete that. But on mile 2, I got on my Instagram and I'm affirming myself and showing people how to use affirmations and mindset to support any endeavor. And I said, and I do feel this way, I have already won because I've already done so much more than I ever thought was possible. And if it's possible for me, it's possible for you. There's nothing special about, none of us are so sick or so perfect that we can't change. None of us is so sick that recovery or any goal that we have for ourselves is not attainable. If we can imagine it, it is possible. We just need to have a plan, trust the plan, follow the plan. So this has been an amazing practice for me, a really beautiful, mindful practice of overcoming obstacles and using my mind to support me and hopefully showing others how to do the same.
And you talk about having a plan, and I can already hear, right? I can already hear, it's not easy for her to say, blah, blah. But you have twins.
They're 18 now. Yeah, they're seniors in high school.
Right. So, I mean, you've got your practice, you've got a
I'm a single
very,
mom of twins living in LA, running a business, and there's no free time. But you know what? We make time for the things that are priorities. And again, it's about modeling. So I'm 52 years old and running my first marathon, okay? Like we're never
yeah,
too old for anything. And again, it's an opportunity to just really prove limiting beliefs are just that. They're just beliefs, and beliefs are just thoughts that we keep thinking, and we can change the thoughts that we keep thinking, and that's how we change our beliefs and through our actions. And so I'm just very excited to be one day at a time showing up for what's up. And things could change. God forbid I have an injury or this or that. We need to focus on our process, not just the end result, and find joy in that process, which I've been really devoted to doing.
yeah, good for you. Because it is, I mean, I've only ever run one full marathon. And, getting back to the plan, you have to have everything right. Because if you don't, if you're not eating right
Mhm.
and you're training, well, you just ran 22 miles last weekend. If you don't have the right nutrition, you can end up with trouble too.
Oh, you have no chance. And so I
Mhm.
really encourage people. I view being able to train for a marathon as a gift and privilege of recovery. It is not for someone who's interested in losing weight and focused on what it's going to do for their body, because you need to put your fueling, your rest, your
Yes,
recovery first. And that's outside of what the scale says or what you think about something. And it really requires a high level of recovery, in my opinion, to be able to navigate all those moving parts, like you said.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up in trouble after my full marathon.
Mhm.
And hence why it's so important what you said, the rest, the recovery, the proper fueling, everything. Know what you're doing. Know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Joy, it's been wonderful. I know you've given us so many messages of hope all the way through this, but do you have one last message of hope for our viewers in some capacity if we're having trouble with our food? If we might be thinking that I might be a food addict, what messages of hope do you have for us?
I think, like I said earlier, recovery is possible for everyone if we can just go into action, even if we don't feel motivated, but we know that we need to change something in our life, that change is possible, and that discomfort, to embrace the discomfort, because that means that things are changing already. I always say that dreams die in our comfort zone. And the opposite of that is also true, that really our greatest wishes and desires and dreams can come true when we're willing to venture just the tiniest bit out of the comfort zone. Recovery is possible, it is available. There are people who understand, who have walked the entire path and are there to guide you, and you never have to be alone again.
Beautiful. Yeah, it is beautiful. So how can people get a hold of you and help you make that $25,000 donation?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm at Dr. Joy Jacobs, DrJoyJacobs on Instagram, and that's where that fundraiser is housed. And that's also where I include lots of educational, motivational videos related to both personal growth and development, food addiction, and eating disorders, as well as links to all my programs. Again, my next program will be launching in early April, and that's when signups are for the following 6 months. And so that's the time to really jump in. My website is drjoyjacobs.com, but Instagram is very current and has lots of stuff, as well as my Facebook page, but that fundraiser is on Instagram. And yeah, so please join me, join my community, follow me. I give a lot of free tips and advice that I think are supportive, and I have we couldn't get into it today, but a whole series that's devoted to self-love that is there daily on my Instagram stories. So it's called Be Superhuman. And I want you to be superhuman with me. And superhuman is not perfect. Superhuman is the person who shows up and loves themselves. That is a superhuman. So we can each be that.
Beautiful. And do you still have the Glow Up program?
I do. It is available on demand. It's called Glow Up, and it's about learning to love yourself from the inside out. And it is an incredible, one of my most joyful creations. When I view the content myself, I get chills because
Ah,
I really feel like it was channeled. It's not even
right.
mine, it's from the universe, and it is life changing. So that is available on demand, and that's also in the links in my Instagram profile.
Awesome. And I'll put the links here as well for anyone who's interested. And it's very reasonable. Like actually, all of your programs are very reasonable, Joy, for the quality that you get out of it. And I'm getting goosebumps again.
Oh, and thank you. This has
Yeah.
been such a gift. I'm just
Oh.
so grateful.
I am grateful too. And if you are new here, please subscribe. I love new subscribers here. It'll help me. It will help Dr. Joy to spread the word that there is so much hope. And you don't need to do it alone. It's like Joy said, you don't need to do it alone. And the secret doesn't need to be a secret, because when we share, that's how other people recover as well. So thank you so much for your gift of spending time here today.
Thank you so much.
God bless, and everyone take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information and group details about Dr. Joy's group therapy, see her website or go to joyshealthybites.com for more information and the next intake date. Dr. Joy lives in Los Angeles, California with her twin sons. This podcast and Inspired Healing Hypnotherapy do not provide medical advice. The information included here is not limited to text, graphics, images, or other material contained, and are for informational purposes only. No material in this podcast is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this site.